They're gonna catch my checklist. That's a bad bet.
Welcome back to Never Fade, the NFT podcast. I'm your host, Faxx. Thanks for joining us. Getting a lot of positive feedback on the podcast. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube and follow us on Twitter at Never Fade NFT. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Goodmonth ETH, in the studio. How are you doing today, Good?
My guy, I'm doing good. Fresh off the Pixel Vol EP, on to EP2 of Jack Buchecki. Man, can't wait to get baby boy back in the studio.
That's right. The other day I had the pleasure of hosting Jack on a Twitter space to talk about Opepen. Now, we've done a few episodes talking about his project Checks from Visualize Value, which is already kind of out there and in the world, in the wild. And ever since he completed that project, he's been turning his focus to this new project called Opepen. And it's been quite an interesting journey to see kind of his thought process in public as he's building this and thinking through what he wants to do with it. Everybody's kind of on the edge of their seat, watching, waiting, but also giving feedback, which is something that's very interesting as part of his process. He kind of does this like transparency time Twitter thread. Definitely want to check that out, where he goes through what he's thinking and takes feedback from the community and takes it into consideration. And what we've seen, Good, is he's really, I think, come a long way in his thought process about this particular project. And it looks like while Checks was kind of a commentary on verification in social media, you know, how Elon Musk started charging for it and other social media platforms kind of followed suit, and kind of the whole concept of that. Checks is a commentary on that. And I think there's a lot of depth there, a lot to be talked about. It looks like Opepen is shaping up to be a commentary on AI and specifically AI art. And that's pretty interesting. Like, what are you seeing so far here, Good?
I mean, it's a heavy task, but I'm seeing Jack as being the philosopher over open source algorithms and visual representation. Like, this is a big task, and I don't mean to put it all on his shoulders, but when you think about his background in Visualize Value and broadcasting visual representation, and now you think about his deep dive into algorithms and using algorithms as tools to further broadcast and visualize, and now bring design and UX on top of that so people can interact. I mean, I really do think that Jack is traversing a wild chasm right now. Like, he's scaling the wall of a chasm and he's building the lines to get to the other side. I'm excited. Did that answer your question?
That was a very well put, and I think I wasn't prepared for kind of where you were mentally there. And that's why we do this, because we're going to have a fire conversation today. For people who didn't watch the previous episodes, including Jack, I definitely encourage you to go back and find those episodes and watch the one with Jack Butcher. I think there was some phenomenal back and forth there that really like philosophically set the stage. And I think what we're going to do here today is understand philosophically what Opepen is about and what he's trying to express, and then also dive into kind of like where we are mechanically as of right now. And again, it's not finished, and so we'll get as much information as we can as it currently exists. And I do anticipate this will end up being like part one, Opepen part one, and we will end up doing another episode once this project is completed and kind of wrap this up, put a nice bow on it for everybody. So we have Jack Butcher back in the studio. Jack, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be back, gents. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we've been following this journey here. We got some nice podcasts recorded about the Checks experience, which is out in the wild. And what we're seeing now is Opepen really evolving and taking new shapes as you kind of think through this process. And it's super interesting to watch you do this in public. You know, from my perspective, like, this is lore building, you know, this experience of you being tasked, really tasking yourself with this PFP project, and really like testing like what is a PFP project and how do you optimize this and where does this go? And now what we're seeing is you're leaning into now Opepen AI, which is, it sounds like a commentary on artificial intelligence as it relates to art. And I think there's a lot to talk to about that today. So let's get into it, Jack. If you could kind of walk us through a little bit your thought process from the inception of Opepen to kind of where you are today, some of the trials and tribulations you've gone through here, and as you've tested kind of some theories and where you're at. Where's your head at, Jack?
All right. So I'll try and keep this the TLDR version because there's a bunch of different things to dig into separately, but the inception story of this thing was really kind of a unplanned, off the cuff, spontaneous thing. So I minted this Opepen edition, single piece of artwork. I think it was early February-ish. Checks was already being worked on, kind of in the middle of the transparency process during checks, and inspired by a bunch of things I saw happening. Obviously, the open edition meta that was just like raging back then. There's an artist that we talked about last week, Batstu, who had a really incredible one-of-one collection called Geometric Pepes, and went on to do like fidenzas as derivatives of that, and just like this incredible like amalgamation of internet culture in a style that was really specific to this guy's art. There was also a reference to Jalil's project in there. It's called Punkscapes, which is the 3:1 banner ratio. They made a 10,000 piece collection based on, you know, homes for CryptoPunks based on the same pixel grid. So that first piece of Opepen art was a reference to what Batstu was doing, a reference to the open edition meta, and a nod to Jalil's landscape banner project called Punkscapes. And it just kind of went out, sat there. It was one per wallet, free mint for 60 minutes. It eerily got really close to the number of pieces minted for checks. So checks was just over 16,000 a handful, and this was just under 16,000. So I don't know what's going on there, but pretty interesting how that happened. And obviously the mint window was 24 times shorter, and it was free, so that has a huge amount to do with it. And then it just kind of sat there, and the check story kept evolving in public, and people who had kind of discovered work as a function of checks being out there were asking questions about what's the plan, what are you doing? I mean, you guys know this as well as anyone, like when, this, why, what. And originally it was like, oh, it's just like a commemorative piece of art, capture a moment in time. Like it was a commentary on what was happening, you know, that you could look back on in 10 years and be like, yeah, that transports me to that era of internet culture that we were all participating in. Anyway, subconsciously, all that stuff got in my brain, and it's like thinking about what that thing represents as a canvas and how it's different from checks. It had that like identity component with it. Like I saw people started to use it as their PFPs. Like they took the little avatar that I made for OpenSea, the 1x1 of it, and I kept seeing it pop up in my notifications, like, you know, person like this thing, and you see like the pattern over and over again. I was like, you know what? Like that's a pretty strong signal that this thing, you know, people identify with this idea or there's something there. And that was like cooking in the back of my mind for a while. And then I tweeted out pretty haphazardly at one point, OPE PFP question mark, just to kind of gauge the interest in turning that into a PFP collection of some description. And that tweet went crazy, and that's kind of validation again for okay, there's something here, there's network effect, and there's obviously like, the established patterns in that like 10,000 collection that people have expectations of and really understand to a degree that I don't think they do, like the mechanisms of checks. So it has a much broader appeal because at least the language maps to a lot of the stuff that's been done before and is like popular zeitgeist wise. And then from that point forward, I just really started to play with the metadata in the same way checks has done that. But it's been a little different because checks was like, the first piece was kind of finished, and then there's variations on the way in which it's colored, versus the Opepen metadata changes have really been like the evolution of what the thing is going to be. Like that first iteration of it does not represent what it's going to eventually look like, and that's, I think, marries more to this idea of identity than checks being about ownership, authorship, a symbol that really, like, if you changed it, would really dilute the meaning of the project. Versus this is I think we talked about this on that space Faxx, the yin and yang qualities of these two projects, where there's a commentary within checks that is much more about actually somebody did a funny tweet the other day, like checks is art, Opepen is identity, and then they like put a little bracket around the A and the I. It's like, here's the complete picture. It's like some inferred thing that was not intentional, but the checks project. Go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, they complement each other well, and in watch, the interesting thing is, like, you're kind of like trying to solve this riddle that you gave yourself, which is like, how do I make 10 or 16,000 basically PFPs that really are uniquely identifiable? And like your first, we kind of watched you in action. At first you were using colors in these shapes, and I think a lot of people had the same question that you were probably asking yourself, is like, how can I make these unique just using colors? Right?
Yeah. Well, it was fascinating. Yeah, that was the initial approach, and obviously the relationship to checks, there's like some geometric similarities there, and I was using the check mark in the top right hand corner of some of the iterations of it early on. And I'm also exploring the question in my own head of, why is it that people feel the need to have that thing be unique in inverted commas, right? Like, what is driving that, and why? That's like a learned thing with everything that's been out to date. And I think the one thing that broke some of my assumptions on that on the front end of this project is people were, again, taking the thing that was up there on every metadata change. There were people like, that resonates with me, I'm putting it as my profile picture. And there was dozens of, maybe hundreds of people doing that on each metadata change, which I think is slightly different than how other collections operate. Like, just the way that they're positioned, people don't think of like pulling one piece out and using it as an identifier. Does that make sense? You guys tracking with that? Like, one of the more established collections, like a CryptoPunks, let's say, like, it's the kind of learned behavior around that collection is like, it's a little bit of faux pas to use one that isn't yours, right? The like ownership associated with one version of that is like, because it came up in that era of, this image is mine and I identify with this thing. This is the thing I collected. I collected the image, not the idea. And I guess that's been the thing that's like swirling around in my head while I see the thesis kind of be proven out, where Faxx, another thing we covered on that space was like the bias that people have around the identifiability of their piece within the collection. Like there's this, and no doubt there are recognizable PFPs in like high visibility collections. Like, use punks as an example again. You got 6529, you got 4156 back when he was rocking the bandana, and this is probably a couple dozen, right? G Money, there's a couple dozen like really recognizable punks, and then there's 9,980 that most people, unless you spend 30 hours a week staring at this stuff, have no idea how to tell them apart. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think it's interesting how we have that bias when we're like in close proximity to this stuff. But when you see the punk, you're like, this is an early adopter of Ethereum for the most part, somebody who is like values some of the qualities of this technology and or was either very early to it or has figured something else out that's allowed them to spend an enormous amount of capital on this asset, right?
Yeah. The uniqueness, being in the space, in the NFT space specifically for about 2.5 years and naviging this identity with the uniqueness is fascinating because we've definitely speed ran metas on the uniqueness. Like at first it was unique or die. It was like like open editions in 21 would have fell on their face. Because it was, unique was everything, and then unique started getting faster and quicker, and there was more unique projects out there, so it got a bit saturated and diluted. But unique was like a fuse. Personally, like I guess just a personal anecdote. Unique was a fuse for me because it turned me on to collect, and I'd never had a collector persona in my life. Like I haven't been a collector. But this uniqueness of these JPEGs on a chain that I loved turned me into a collector. And so I started hunting, and this is, I was hunting punks. And then when I started hunting apes, I started understanding just like the metas in the apes, like the hip hop jacket. It was a mid rare, but I knew like it was capturing a meta, and there were just things that you knew were going to have these collective consciousness. And before you know it, you built a bag. And then the secondary comes in and takes your bag to the moon. And you didn't have really anything to do with taking that bag to the moon. And now all of a sudden, you're very unapproachable because you've been hunting uniques. And it happened at your event, actually. Like we were talking with someone, and they had an M2 Mutant and Diamond Grill, and we're sitting back and like I have my Trippy Ape on my watch, and I'm just like covering it. I'm just like I don't want to put it out there. I don't want to make people feel bad or feel things. Like I went on a collector journey, and now there's Faxx of course is like, hey, whip it out, what you got? And I'm like, I was like, so I put it out there. But uniqueness is an odd dynamic because I think it's like a catalyst to an experience. And I'm not sure, like this is definitely, I think, a question for you. I know it's a question for you, is like, and maybe you can't answer it right now, maybe you have to think on it, but I wonder if uniqueness has a half-life, and I'd be interested on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think you're spot on to make that observation that mechanic is a really powerful way to like introduce some degree of like objectivity into these collections, especially when it's like a new thing. It's like I was a Pokemon card fanatic when I was a kid, like Pogs, like physical collectible stuff. Like when you rip the pack open and the shiny Charizard is in there, it's like you just lose your mind, right? And if you applied if you took that out, so that's not even necessarily uniqueness, but that's, I guess, like some fixed variables in terms of the quantities in which X appears, which creates like these tiers of value. And I think that is really what, like that quality in human nature, your desire to like obtain scarce things, or our collective desire to obtain scarce things, like obviously these early collections that were super successful, one, created an aesthetic that resonated with people, and then within that aesthetic designed these mechanics that drove interest in varying degrees. And I find it so, it's almost like you have to acknowledge that at every level to create interest. Like you there needs to be layers of nuance in this thing beyond just the image resonates with me, right? I think the real trick, or the real like challenge with taking some of those mechanics and like borrowing what works without just doing the same thing again, right? I think I had this, whenever the Bored Ape thing happened in, what was it, May of 21, something like that?
Yeah, April, May 21.
April, May. I just knew then, like day I saw that, I was like, give it 12 weeks, there'll be 5,000 of these things, you know, like just people just go down, buckle down, like take, you know, and it happened, right? There was thousands and thousands and thousands, and it's still happening now. And Nouns was another project that resonated with me from a philosophical point of view, and the mechanisms they designed were fascinating and different and took advantage of the infrastructure in a way that I don't think you could have built something like that in a, you know, on any other technology. So there's things to appreciate about basically every successful, however you're defining that, every project that, you know, enters the collective consciousness. There's maybe something to, well, not maybe, there's something to learn from every single one of those, and the degree of like profundity is different in each, right? Some things just succeed because they hit at the right point in time and people were hungry for a thing, and others are like designing a mechanic that is the first of its kind and is you know, valuable for that reason, or perceived to be valuable for that reason. And then there are like the combinations of all these things together, which is, this is how, like, where my mind is right now, where how do you take some of those qualities, some of those things that are, I mean, Chex is trying to do this too, is like acknowledging, it's kind of it's like poking fun at all of these ideas too, right? It's like there's this arbitrary rarity system, arbitrary in inverted commas, like it's been designed, engineered. It references, you know, in the case of a Bored Ape Yacht Club, it's like it references like precious metals and like objects that we would consider valuable, crowns, things like that, where like you can abstract that away into all sorts of different things. And that's what Chex tries to do. It's, you know, the quantity of these things reducing makes it more valuable. And doing that in an identity project and doing it originally is difficult. When I was in LA, I had a few conversations with people who like have built these 10,000 item collections, and I don't know, I think we're just building something for a different person, or a different mentality, but at the same time like trying to incorporate and recognize the like dynamics within those collections that makes them successful. Because I don't think it is necessarily like that one has an earring and that one doesn't, you know, like that one has 5 traits or that one has 6 traits. There is some truth to that on like if you're looking at the numeric occurrences of these things, but there's also this resonates with me and like more than that one. I think that's true for everyone, right? You look at a page of any NFT collection that say that the overall aesthetic resonates with you. If you look at 9 of them, everyone's going to say that's my favorite one. Like everyone has the ability to like distinguish between the differences. And I think that's the interesting thing. It's like taste. And if you have we talked about this again, Faxx on the Spaces, is like if the aesthetic constraint at the very top of the collection is one style, then you're already like narrowly funneled. So it's like, what is my taste within this set of 10 characters that already look the same to somebody that isn't looking at it as closely as I am, right? So what we're trying to play around with the Opepen stuff recently, and we might be skipping a few steps here, but this might be a good idea to plan, is if you can create something that's geometrically consistent, so you can recognize it as a part of this collection, but you can incorporate a way broader range of tastes. So the way in which that thing is rendered is, speaks to my mom, speaks to like a kid who plays Fortnite every day. Like this idea of a symbol that can transcend these like aesthetic bubbles is what I'm trying to play around. And that's where it just like expands into something almost unwranglable. But then when you have the 16,000 constraint, that is the forcing function to make decisions of like what gets in, what doesn't get in. And even beyond that, which we could talk about here too, is that even a finished idea? Like if the way in which this stuff is evolving, AI specifically, like when I started playing with that, I've gotten so much better at that in the course of a week. Like the outputs that I was getting last Wednesday compared to the ones I'm getting this morning, I'm like, man, this has to be, like we have to be at the top of the curve now, but we're nowhere close. So I'm like, I can in good conscience push 16,000 of these out because I'm getting so much better at it every day and there's people putting out submissions on Twitter that are better than mine and like more like different and have like, they have different experiences, different reference points. And it's like, how can we design something that is kind of has those scarce constraints, but just allows for that like abundant creativity to just flywheel? And I think we have a couple ideas on how we can achieve it.
Yeah, and I think, something that's really interesting, I want to get into, so I'm gonna put this out there as something I want to get into. I'm not gonna get there right now, but on the Twitter Spaces with Faxx, you talked about AI being addicting. I don't want to go there right now, but I have a similar experience where I lost 48 hours of my life in a dream state, prompting, and it was, so I want to talk about that with you. But prior to getting there is, I think that, where you are a goat is you're a goat in constraints, and you can put constraints on something and you can find freedom in those constraints. And, I've done my share of philosophy reading, and it just makes me go into this like Hegelian mindset where I don't know if you know anything about Hegel, but I'm just going to get nerdy on you right now, where basically he says there's like 3 stages of freedom, and like everyone starts off as a slave. And masters are never free because love is what they want and it's conditional. So masters are out the game. They can't be free. So slaves is either you wage your life and you take a shot at being free. You stay a slave and you're free within constraints, and you try and you essentially stay within that constraint, or you are forever a slave and you transcend into your own God. And I know I just got weird on you all here, but the reason why I bring that up is because it also takes me back to a very Kantian approach between checks and Opepen, where checks is very objective. It's verification. It's an object. It's the concept folder that Immanuel Kant started to build and stuff the subjectiveness in the objective folder. And now you're on the Opepen wave, and it's like you're breaking through the subjectivity, and it feels like when you started talking about AI, it felt like this MFer is transcending right now. Like he is chained to that constraint and he has gone God mode on this thing. So now, with that preface, if we can go into that AI experience, like it really does feel like Jack Butcher at this point in his life is going through a transcendence, an experience of what AI can do, is doing, and can proliferate. comments on that?
Yeah, man. That's I mean, beautifully worded. Teed me up a treat there. So my initial reaction to it is kind of like the NFT thing, honestly. Like, you know, you see it in the Twitter feed probably a year before it becomes like trending topic among your technology, like, you know, technology, Twitter, NFT, whatever you want to call it, internet obsessed. And I didn't necessarily like dismiss it, but I was like, oh, this is, you know, kind of not a tool for me, because I was like in the diagram game basically, and like good luck prompting an AI to make a like sensical geometric diagram. It probably, you know, maybe it will get there at some point, but that stuff is still like very hard to describe, you know, put in as a prompt and get something. Like it's way faster to just do it yourself basically. But if you wanted to render like, you know, crowd of people in the woods doing X, Y, and Z, that's legitimately, you know, 48 hours of Cinema 4D and like crazy production work. And I come from the agency world where there are production studios that I went, actually give a personal anecdote, that I worked with the production agency that did the Nike ads for, I wasn't on this job, but this is just an anecdote I heard, the Nike ads for one of the World Cups in 2000 and maybe 2014, something like that. And they shot, I believe, a commercial with Ronaldinho, and the commercial was shot on a football pitch with mirrors. So he was running through this pitch, like bouncing a ball off a mirror, running, like his image was everywhere, right? And then before the World Cup was played, they changed the number on his jersey. So like, oh shit, we're gonna have to redo the commercial and he's not available to shoot, so we're gonna have to go in and retouch every frame. And his jersey number is on like 60 mirrors in every frame of this commercial. And I walked into this room, there's like 100 computers, people just like frame by frame going through it, editing this thing. So that when AI came out from that perspective, I was like, all right, yeah, image making, these guys are in trouble. Like it's now like, you know, your ability to generate an image that's in your mind's eye is coming, and all the people that are doing that manually are going to have to adapt. And I'm sure those guys have been on this technology, and humans figure stuff out, and you know, economies reshape themselves around technology. The long-winded point being, like, I didn't see an application for me when that first came out, because that's not the type of work I do, not the type of work I'm interested in, blah, blah, blah. And just, I didn't think there was any, I was like, admit that the prompt thing didn't feel like that profound to me to like create these random images with a bunch of prompts. So that's where the constraint comes in, and that's where I started to see like the insane value in it was, how do these like, I think this was another quote from the space, like this aggregation of visual consciousness, human consciousness, like the things that these models are trained on is basically, you know, hundreds of millions experiences that you couldn't have if you lived 1,000 lifetimes, and now you can type into a computer and see that thing. And that's, to your point about it being like immersive, addictive, like something that pulls you in. It's like, yeah, the dream state, I think, is the right way to describe it. It's like you're able to, like your ability to describe something is the only limit on the images that you can pull up in front of you, which is just what an insane concept. Yeah, I think I lost the.
Yeah, you know, you're good. You're good.
TLDR
yeah,
of the first question.
No, yeah, we like to kind of see you painfully think through this process a bit. Yeah. You know, I hate to say it, but
no,
you know,
I think
go ahead, Ken.
The question was, you know, transcendence, and I think that gets to the singularity inbound tweet that you had, because you know, for people who know what singularity is, it's uploading. Singularity is uploading your consciousness into a server of some kind, And it feels like, I spent really a whole 48 hours glued to the keyboard, prompting just a wild dream state. And at this point, when I did this, it was on DALL-E 2. I was fading AI. I was fading image creation. But then I just couldn't get away from it. And I was really writing a script with a visual image in a way that I've never been able to communicate before in my life. And, I think I threw probably about 2,200 prompts at it, building this whole scene. And it really did hit me at that point. I was like, this is how you upload your consciousness. This is how you upload your consciousness and create an experience that you are downloading into your subconsciousness. And so my question for you on that note, paired with Jalil's Opepen AI thread, is you're cooking in this AI space. Opepen is cooking in this AI space. And where do you put yourself as an arbiter of holders' experience with the Opepen when it comes to AI?
So I think the organic response to it has been people want to manipulate it. And that's another thing that is people say one thing and do another. So like this idea of when is this collection going to be finished and when do I get the version of the Opepen that is assigned? And that's where all of this conflict comes from, is like the ability for you to manipulate this thing and have it represent your taste, whether that's through like finding other interpretations in the collection that resonate with you or generating them yourself. To me, like having a yardstick that is enough unification to become a barometer for people's.
When you say yardstick, are you talking like the constraints here?
Yeah, I'm talking about the geometry being consistent in every iteration of this thing. The purpose that can then serve is it like really represents. So, there's a guy on Twitter, I think his handle is JKHEUB, Jacob, who is an architect and has been one of the biggest contributors to the remixing of the Opepen geometry. And I look at like the 50 or so that he's produced, and it really helps me understand his like aesthetic, his palette, his like the way he thinks in a different way than if I went to his architecture portfolio, because I'm not an architect. So like I could probably look at it and be like, that's interesting. But the fascinating thing to me about this is the constraint that ties them together is so simple that it almost becomes invisible. But it gives you something consistent to compare. In like if you had two next to each other, in the same way of what we talked about in the Bored Ape collection, let's say. Oh, that one resonates with me more than that one. But all you're really saying there is like, the hip hop jacket, for example, is a signal of my taste in music, right? Versus like some of the complexity that's coming out of these AI outputs is like it's introducing people to a genre of art or a type of architect or like a scientific process or a cultural reference or something. To me, it's just crazy that you can embed all of this stuff in there and have people project themselves onto this thing in a way that like creates something that somebody else can identify with or ask a question about or appreciate. It's like a really difficult thing to understand, but that's the thing that I don't want to lose in finishing it in inverted commas is
you've identified drivers in your community. Like, you've identified people that are circling around you, and some you haven't even heard of, you don't even know about, right? Like, I'm sure there's ones you just haven't seen yet, but you have people in your community that are creatives, whether in whatever capacity they are creative, they're coming together to create on your framework. And you have inspired people to drive it in a direction. And it sounds like you're going to do everything you can to let those people cook and live.
100%. Yeah, that is what happened with checks. Was, I think, on the derivative front, fascinating, powerful, but there was a longevity issue, or there's a I don't know. There's something about the, like, that thing hitting the world at a moment and creating a moment, and then that moment, like, in hindsight, becoming more interesting, valuable, like a timestamp on, like, a shift in culture. And my gut is with this, that the identity component, or the, like, anthropomorphic component of this thing and the flexibility of it gives it that much more, I think the check stuff continues, and it's way more flexible in how it can be interpreted. And, like, my hope and assumption is, like, the more conversation happens around who is and who isn't verified, and what verification is, and authenticity on the internet, the more poignant of a project checks becomes. And then this is kind of like that identity piece, or the image generation piece, or the how can you broadcast your taste out into the world, that in a world where AI is a thing, taste and judgment is the differentiator, right? That's the leverage that any individual has. If English is a programming language, or your spoken word is a programming language, I should say, then creating something that allows people to express their taste, at least on, like, you know, not to get too grandiose about this, but there's something about, like, working on the same thing that creates that like compounding effect of community too, where it's like, how did you do that?
Yep.
Show me what prompt you used for that. Like, you're working kind of in the same area versus, like, competing with, like, I can't really share the secret of this, or, like, I'm working on this project over here. And it does present challenges, right? Like, sharing what you're doing in real time, it's like people can take it and spin it off in a different way, or, like, you're not, like, working for 3 months and then having this, like, mega announcement of something, like, grand happening. I really just don't think the world functions that way anymore. It's just not a I think maybe we said this even on the last podcast. It's like, journalists now will spend 6 months writing a story. They'll put it out, and 3 hours later, it's gone. You know, it's like
exactly.
That framework is just very, very.
I think you just drove home something really. I think you just made a connection with me that I've never made before. Is that when you look at, like, CryptoPunks and Bored Ape Yacht Club, the tastemakers in those collections were the traits. The traits drove people. It was the framework that was the pillar that people rallied around, and they got their group chats, and then they had their identity grew. You know, you could have your uniqueness, but your uniqueness amplified when you had the pillar of the trait. The trait was the tastemaker. What you're having with Opepen right now is you're having humans drive you're having them drive their subjectivity into the Opepen. And that is being a tastemaker. And it really makes me go back and think, like, 2 years ago, if I could have, like, just submitted my hip hop ape to the hip hop trait and let the tastemaker drive, would I have done it? Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I would have done it, I think, in a heartbeat, because I found my uniqueness through that ape. But I found my community through the trait. And then I wanted to basically delete my uniqueness and submit it to the trait. And ultimately what I wanted was community out of it. And you just kind of made that connection for me. I've never thought about it like that. I think it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and I think that there's like three like key, I want to say, like statements or ideas that wrap around the Opepen project. The first is permissionless proliferation of the meme, which is a term that I picked up from you, Jack. And I think that speaks to like all of these people throughout the NFT community, like really like from all the different sub-communities coming out and putting their kind of spin and impression on the Opepen. And what that does, in essence, is like it takes that kind of framework image and it makes it more viral and it grows that meme. You know, at the end of the day, this does come back down to this internet culture meme of Pepe, of the frog, something so simple, but also something so interesting. So we're seeing this kind of like permissionless proliferation of the meme. Like that's one. The next is, you know, if you go to the Opepen OpenSea page, you have this statement that says, you know, this artwork may or may not be handmade, right? Which is this kind of question we're posing in terms of artificial intelligence and art, that you're really like, you're asking, like, what is art now? And then that kind of brings us to this kind of, I think, point you were making, which is like, what is hard work when we're talking about producing AI? You know, is it the prompts? Is it the tastes? You know? And so I think what's unfolding here, just as like Good is making this connection here of like, wow, like this could have been so different had we given the creatives the opportunity to produce within this constraint their taste and their style. And it brings us to this really like kind of wrapping us to this point of like, that is uniqueness. We're not telling somebody, here's your PFP, you know, pick one of these. We're saying, hey, who are you? Who are you? Here, tell us who you are. Here's how you can tell us who you are. Here's how we'll know that we're thinking about the meme the same way through this template, but we're going to learn a lot more about you from what you generate. So like, is that where we're going here, Jack?
Yeah. I also think there is a question to be asked around this. This is the subtle or not so subtle tie back to checks, is the generation of a Opepen from a certain address, like the taste of somebody else being expressed. Like, let's say Xcopy did 100 Opepens, right? He should be able to sign those with his Ethereum address, and they live in the collection. Again, that none of these mechanics are final. Is that a more valuable asset than something somebody owns that they can continually express their taste through? Is that the other way to think about this is, imagine a gallery of all of the pieces that Faxx has generated, right? Like if there's 100 pieces that have come out of you prompting this thing, and one of them, or you can pick and choose between which one you want to display at any given time. Like there's ways to switch this back and forth. The thing I think that like the bigger question comes down to the mental shift of identifying with the idea versus the individual image, right? And the bigger societal question I think that we face in the like the nearer term than a lot of us thought, is like, what are people going to be doing when this stuff proliferates to, you know, reducing the job that takes 40 hours a week to 1 hour a week? And maybe we just like completely adapt, right? And we start doing like my gut tells me that's not going to be the case, right? There's a huge amount of disruption coming where like tasks, like rote tasks, get automated to the point where there's like this massive gap of time for people to figure things out. And that's like the focus of Visualize Value since its inception was, how do you like use the internet to, one, like build an independent stream of income. That was the first, like that was the core idea. But the only way you do that is like making connections with people that value what you do enough to pay you for it, right? And that's incredibly hard. So like, I think the utopian view of NFTs and a digital economy is like, we just like trading art back and forth, right? We're there.
Yeah.
What is it? What else is there going to be to do? You know, like
everything's a meme. Like we're so mimetic. The US dollar is a meme. Punching the clock is a meme. Right, everything's a meme. Like,
it's
and
all
so
a meme.
It's all a meme. And I think you've smoked this concept of building this on a mimetic layer. You know, when I first saw Opepens, I nabbed 8 because I just thought like, how cool, frame that on my wall. And when people come in my office, I could be like, oh yeah, those are the first dollars I made in the business. And like, I always thought like that was like what the Opepen was to me. And now it's just, it's like the fact that this is a mimetic layer that everything's being built on top of, it really gives people room to run. A question for you is like, do you see prompting? No, let me ask that different. How do the words prompt, engineering, and ownership correlate to you?
So I think this definitely the abstraction of, or the abstraction layer of being an engineer is changing, right? Like you don't have to, I think it might be overstated how much like logic you can skip, at least right now. Like you like I have access to all of these tools. I'm not a programmer, and it doesn't like make me feel as though I can go and program something. It's like this mega accelerant to people who are already engineers, and in the same way that like the layer or the constraint that you introduce becomes that's the thing that you can accelerate. It's very easy to like 6 months ago I sat in front of the like DALL-E thing, and I was just like, what am I going to write here? Just like look around, like there's a thing over there and there's the name of a book, and then I just, you know, make an image, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really know what it's good for. But if you have something to focus, like if you have something to apply it to, that feels to me like when you start to get the unlock is when you have a problem, a puzzle, a challenge, as you described it, Faxx, to like direct it towards. It's like this accelerant. And was it prompting, engineering, and ownership? And that the idea, man, ownership is an interesting one. And I think a lot of the promises in permissionless markets are way more like they sound better than they eventually end up operating in free markets, right? Like the attention span of people is so poor that I don't know, some of these experiments that try new economic models just never seem to get the like activation energy required to see them through. Or it's like, I'm really interested in this project, but oh wait, this new project just came out and it's gaining traction faster than this, so let me go jump over there, right? The ability for things to compound is very tough in this space. But you really just trying to convince one person every couple of days that really sees what you're trying to do And that's like, I hope that's the case with these projects, is like, there's obviously a lot of, and there's so much to understand, I think, or there's so much, if you want to understand, there's like layers to it, but there's also like, oh, you know, funny meme, like people will like that. That's like the base level. The I don't know, trying to position the whole thing as like ownership and stewardship of an idea is what we're trying to accomplish, and it will be difficult to do, but it's also, if that, like leaving, like creating something that represents this like massive shift in like the ability for people to like visualize anything, that will be a successful like building an economy around this thing eventually would be like the ultimate goal, right? Is like create something that like redirects energy around the network, but a like V0 of that having a like community generated like giving people a sense of ownership in something because they were a part author versus like bought something at the market is that's a different definition of ownership to me. So that, as you can tell, all these questions are like fuzzy in my head right now, but what we're trying to build, with like enough constraint to increase participation, but also like room for expression, like creativity. It's like there's this massive unlock happening in people who didn't think they could participate in this space as a creator, and now they can, which is a fascinating time.
Yeah, I think there's you hit on this briefly, but I think the space, when you have net new technology and you don't have the use cases, people tend to just throw the archetype of the way things were at the new technology. And I think one of the greatest failures in this space that actually could be a very benevolent thing, but I think it's one of the greatest failures that we've ripped from the old way of doing things and tried to apply it to new, is DAOs. I think DAOs are very good concepts, and I think they hit a wall because they tried to do old world things with a very net new concept. And I think one of the biggest fallacies within DAOs, I'll tie this back, I promise, but one of the biggest fallacies within DAOs, I believe, is that we conflated governance with ownership. And when we conflate governance with ownership, I think we accidentally snuffed out creativity. I think we suffocated creativity because we brought governance and ownership together as the same thing. And you had a line on that I'd never heard before on the Twitter Spaces around like, if you take in everyone's opinion on a horse, you get a camel. That's what I think every DAO has kind of created, because it's governance, it's ownership, and people are loud and they're voting and their attention spans are dwindling, and the creativity is just wrung out of that thing. And so I really do see with where you're headed an opportunity to create this, you said redirect energy, or redirect, I think, energy within an economy. I see you creating a diversification of personas where you have collectors, you have creators, you have people that are staking ownership, but they're not voting. You have people that are voting and driving, but they're not creating. And you have a actual like persona-driven ecosystem where people can have a place. And ironically, last episode we talked to Pixel Vault, and Pixel Vault, we came in with hot questions. Like, we did not expect to put them in the no fade zone. And our biggest ask of them, personally, was, you took money for people's assets and screw what the secondary did, but it's now your job to carve a persona out for them. and not tell them to get on the ship or get off the ship, but tell them what the ship is and invite everyone to have a space in it. And I really do I really want to put out there that what you're doing with checks and what you're doing with Opepen has been such an objective and subjective journey that you have an opportunity to engage multiple personas within this economy. And so before I throw it to you, anybody who's listening to this, anyone who comes to Jack and says, when, anyone who comes to Jack and says, like, when are you going to do this for me? Like, understand, like, I think you, Jack, are tackling this at such a broad scale. You know, to the degree that the Pokemon cards aren't just 5 in a pack anymore. It's a screen and it's a network. And I think, you know, you have the opportunity to carve out a lot of personas. So with that said, I want to thank you for everything you're taking on because it's a big task. B, like, when you look at the personas that you can create within this space, like, how does that hit with you?
One of the biggest things, I agree with a lot of the commentary on the DAO stuff, where you're just creating an environment where it's just impossible to be creative. Like, all the permission that is required to do the thing creates obviously a ton of friction. And a lot of it is, I launched this thing a couple of years ago called the Permissionless Apprentice. It's $1 program that's like 40 lessons of, like, you want to go and like practice any craft on the internet, just do it, post it, and put it in front of the person that you want to work with. And to me, like, a lot of this comes from trying to capture too much of the value you create, right? It's like you want 100% of the value you create, but that's like a flawed idea, because by putting it out there in a way that anybody can engage with it, you're increasing the surface area of it, and you can capture the same amount with 1% if it's in front of more people. So the way I think about it is, like, reduce friction to zero as best as possible and create something that is like a layer of expression for people that solves the cold start problem, and then let them build things permissionlessly with each other. Like, it doesn't have to be, I think that's another thing where, like, trying to wrap everything back under the thing that started it, right? Is like the idea of wanting to own all the properties that you were some of a catalyst in getting started, versus I don't know, just creating something that automatically just spins off all these organic connections by itself, and then not trying to capture anything unnaturally or like pull things back in. It's kind of a vague answer, but that's like, I know there's something to that when you see people doing something with no incentive other than like, oh, this is fun, I just want to participate in this thing. I think that can lead to amazing things. Right. Incredible. And like, today there's a space going on later where a couple people are going to go and do AI on Cyber gallery. They're going to stick up an AI tutorial. Here's how to use the tool. Here's how to prompt with Opepen. Here's how to do X, Y, and Z. I have no idea. Like, you know, there might be 12 people that go to that thing and 6 of them learn how to do this. The skills that they learn or the people they meet, it's not all about directly going back into that world. It's like that skill might give them an edge in their career, or it might introduce them to somebody that they start a side project with, or like, it's really just, if we can make this symbol represent like permissionless creativity, like making real connections with people based on your taste and their strengths and your weaknesses, and it really is like a symbol that represents something that hopefully people can come together around and spend time making things that, you know, either they enjoy or, well, definitely they enjoy, but like on a long enough timeline, like that network effect brings more value back to them because they're plugged into this thing that other people identify with. And everybody trying to start a brand by themselves it's just like, people don't have the mental capacity to, like I'm saying, to store a brand in their mind for everybody, right? Like the idea that you can contribute to this thing that is bigger than you, but also spin that off into individual exercises. There's a couple of like really tangible examples. Like these on cyber architects are a great example of for checks and Opepen, people building spaces to exhibit that work and then getting commissions for other projects, for other, it allows you to tap into a meme and create this on-ramp to all the other things you want to do and meet other people that are like equally inspired by that thing, which I think is like a 1 + 1 = 3 situation in most cases. When you like, I'm not even really sure how we got to being in this conversation with one another, and that's kind of the beauty of it, right? That's like, it was not a forced thing. It was a like completely organic function of us appreciating this abstract thing that contains all this coded subconscious stuff that probably means when the two of us or three of us or four of us work on something together, we can make something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Same like analogy for working with Jalil and Traf on Visualized Value. I didn't like find those guys on a job board. They followed the work for years. Like, we implicitly understand each other, respect each other, have like complete trust in each other's taste. And you can just make amazing things with people that you share all of those things with. So if we can do that again in a way that, Visualized Value had constraints that were like much harder to follow or much harder to replicate, and it wasn't even really designed that way, right? It was trying to propagate ideas that would help people act without like explicit permission and think about the world in a different way, but there was no like specific on-ramp to getting into this environment with other people. This has that, so hopefully it continues. Thank you.
I'll echo good sentiment about taking the time to make this what you want it to be and not responding to the pressures of the secondary marketplace. But the other like big point here is like the experience of the people who are engaged, who are watching this story unfold, who are reading this story as it's being written. That's part of like the nuance here. And I can tell you there's a lot of people in the NFT community, in the NFT space, that honestly, that's all they wanted. They wanted to be part of the experience. They wanted to have a direct line of communication to the artist, to the creator. And that is what's going to, at the end of the day, form diamond-handed holders who are like, no, this means so much to me. This is going to be vaulted forever. And that will kind of sort itself out in the marketplace. So my advice there is to encourage you to, like, as we move forward here, as this idea starts to form closer and closer to the finish, like let's get out of more spaces, let's engage the community more, get their feedback, because I do think that part of the experience, it resonates with people a lot and is going to make for like a collector experience that's a lot different and unique, and will have sustainability.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point, and definitely the intention. I think the thing that dissuades me in any, like, because it's the second time around, the checks one, I felt way more comfortable being like, this might change. Here's where we're thinking right now. This might change. This, like, the speed at which this is changing is like, it gives me pause. Like, I feel like the ideas need to be a little bit more clarified before sharing them. But I think maybe voice is a better format for just like talking it out at various stages rather than like writing out mechanics, because people get attached to that a little differently. So that's well taken. We'll figure that out.
Shoo! I got nerdy on it with that Hegelian example, huh?
Yeah, man. Never cease to amaze me, man. I don't know where you came up with that, but we'll take it. We got to spend some more time with Jack. Is another interesting and unique experience listening to what he has to say. I think the big takeaway here, though, for everybody is like, from my perspective is, we've been in the space, we've experienced community, we've experienced being holders of different NFTs. For myself, like, I really, Like, I like the part where we get to be engaged with the people who are producing the project. Like, my kind of thought process is if we are in fact early to this space and then early to an NFT project, I think there should come with potentially the opportunity to influence what's going to happen in this in this project. And I think that's what we get with Jack when it comes to like the transparency time concept, getting feedback from the community. This is not like a fully finished NFT yet. And that's also why we wanted to get Jack in here, because we kind of understand he's at a point still where he's cooking, he's thinking, he's grappling with these ideas. And I think it's important to be able to capture Jack during that time, because there will be a time in the future when it's finished and all that, and it'll be a different sentiment, it'll be a different energy. And right now we're kind of capturing like the struggling, artist trying to get to the point where he feels like this is ready to release. And hopefully people will enjoy that. And I think it's part of the lore building and it's part of the storytelling here. So good. Before we wrap this up, any kind of takeaways in terms of this conversation?
Hey, well, first off, just that I wasn't bullshit. I got the Hegelian book here. These are notes from 10 years ago, right? Go right in on this. Consciousness exists in and for itself when and by the fact that it so exists for another. That is, it exists only in being acknowledged. He is acknowledging his consciousness by prompting it into a server and achieving singularity. That's what I'm fucking talking about. Nerds on deck. That make any sense to you, Faxx?
I don't think anything else needs to be said, dude. At this point, let's wrap it up. That's another episode of Never Fade, the NFT podcast. I'm your host, Faxx. Follow me on Twitter at Faxx_ETH with my co-host, Goodmonth, ETH, and our producer, Hazel B. Jordan on Twitter. Follow us at Never Fade NFT. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube, click, comment, share this with your friends. We appreciate you. Thanks for coming on this journey with us. That's a wrap. See you next time.
That's a bad bet if the bags check less. About to burn back to back, flipping not cheap when that Jenny duh hits. That's the race to 250 in the world and you chose to sleep. That's a bad bet if you wake up checkless. No more people without bags, yet they need status. Running head first with the VV check thirst. Never heard of a hearse, but they can